A quiet family evening that was about to start any minute. The sun was streaming through the window, bringing peace and tranquility. Our house was as quiet as ever. I was cooking dinner, and my husband David would be home soon. Our son's Dawn is now 20 years old. I remember every step he took, every word he said in his early years. And now in front of me was a grown, statuesque young man whom I began to understand less and less as the years passed after 18 years. At one point, I noticed as I turned around how his gaze completely encompassed my figure, which made me very wary. His gaze just froze for a few seconds in the area of my neck, shoulders, and chest. After dinner, we watched TV as usual, but my father still wasn't home. Family nights like that made me happy. I froze for a moment, remembering the way he looked at me at that moment. My mind began to swarm with all sorts of thoughts. I suddenly realized that I was increasingly seeing him not as the little boy who'd recently been running under the table, but as a grown man. This realization was confusing, and I tried to push it away, but it was taking over more and more of my attention. The dawn light from the window, the quiet romantic movie, that peaceful atmosphere I loved so much. It was all supposed to be familiar, safe. Suddenly, Stim moved closer to me, almost imperceptibly. His hand lightly touched mine. I felt goosebumps run all over my body. A spark slipped inside, instantly thrilling me. The sensation was so unexpected that I jumped up as if waving away an obsession, trying to chase away the strange, unfamiliar situation. My heart was pounding frantically in my chest. I hurried to the kitchen for a glass of cold water, trying to cool my own emotions. Stim, remaining on the couch, asked in casual voice, "Mom, are you okay?" His tone was calm, but I could hear the worry in his voice. "Yeah, I'm fine," I answered hastily, trying not to show embarrassment. I was just tired. I went back into the living room and sat on the edge of the couch, away from him, trying to pull myself together. We continued watching the movie, but now in complete silence. I didn't know how to act. My heart was still racing. And for the first time, my mind was racing with thoughts I couldn't stop. I love him so much. This is my son. I put all my best tears into him, tried to make his upbringing perfect. But now, something inside me was breaking that ideal. After about 15 minutes, I got up and said, "I'm going to bed. No offense. Please, stay by yourself." I tried to smile, but my voice shook when I got into bed. I couldn't stop thinking, well, what was it? What had I felt? I tried to justify myself. It's all just an illusion. It's just a weird thought in my head, and it'll pass. But the more I thought, the more the realization came. I had crossed some invisible line. I didn't want to feel this way. Didn't want to give into these thoughts. It's not normal. It's just fatigue. I told myself the next morning. I woke up as usual, but something was no longer right. When I walked into the kitchen, Stim was sitting at the table, calmly eating a bacon roll, and drinking coffee on the other half of the table was my breakfast portion. I stopped, a little surprised. "You surprised me a lot," I said with a smile, feeling something inside of me tingle. My legs were trembling a little. I tried to be calm, but in that moment I realized I was right. I was fixated on what had happened. I'd gotten myself too worked up, and now I was seriously wondering if it was time to see a counselor. Stim looked up and replied, slurping, "Good morning, Mom." His voice was so normal, I was suddenly relieved. Maybe it really was just my weird thoughts. I didn't know if I should ask that question or try to deal with it on my own, but his presence, his closeness, it was as if he was the strength I reached. For in moments of doubt, this is my son after all. I took a deep breath and made up my mind. Stim, could you help me today? My voice shook, but I tried to make it sound as natural as possible. Sure, Mom, he answered readily as if nothing unusual had happened. I wasn't entirely sure why. ID said that, maybe. I just needed a distraction to get away from all these disturbing thoughts and feel normal, damn it, it's my son, calm down, enough is enough. I kept telling myself, it's okay, we're just going on a little road trip. An hour later, we were on our way in our pickup truck. The weather was delightful, the air was fresh, and the sky was clear and blue. Everything seemed so peaceful that I was even ashamed of the stupid things I thought of the night before. We chatted about his parties, his new friends, and his now adult life. It was the kind of easy conversation that made me smile happy, proud he had grown so much, and what a joy it was for me to hear his stories. Laughter filled the car as he suddenly shouted, "Stop! Stop, Mom! Let's stop here." Alice said, "Thanks for..." "Look how beautiful it is." He waved his arms excitedly, his eyes burning with enthusiasm. I laughed, feeling his carefree joy, and gave in. "Okay, you talked me into it. Just don't yell like that," I said, pulling the car to a stop. We stepped out of the pickup truck. The silence of the forest and the perfect beauty of nature surrounded us. The clean air filled my lungs, and for a moment I felt completely calm. I closed my eyes, savoring this moment, but suddenly Stem stepped closer, almost right up to me. I opened my eyes and looked up at him. His face was so close, and there was something in his eyes that I hadn't noticed before. "Mom," he said quietly, and there was something new and different in his voice. "You know how important you are to me, don't you?" I felt goosebumps run down my spine at those words, at his gaze full of a feeling I didn't understand. Again, that strange, forbidden sensation pierced me. I looked up at him, trying to keep control of myself. "Of course, darling," I said, trying to sound calm, but everything was turning inside me. "You're my son, and you're the most important person in the world to me." I took a step back to get some distance. "I love you so much. You're the most precious thing in the world to me," Stem said in a low whisper. A tear rolled down my cheek. I didn't realize it was so awkward to hear my son say, but it was so exciting and pleasant at the same time. "Yes, me too. I love you too," I said, barely containing my emotions. He gripped my hand tightly, and as cold, almost penetrating gaze settled on my face, I shuddered. Fear lodged deep inside like an intruder. I couldn't believe it was happening in real life. My whole body tensed like a string, ready to burst at the slightest touch. "Do you feel fear and embarrassment?" My voice was barely audible, almost a whisper. But I felt like every sentence I said could ruin everything. He didn't answer right away. The something new and unrecognizable flashed in his eyes. "That's it, that's not it." My words trailed off. I didn't know how to continue, how to explain to him that everything I felt was a wall between us that couldn't be crossed. "It's not supposed to be like this, you know." I tried to find the right words so as not to hurt him, not to ruin this moment. "I'm not afraid or embarrassed, I'm just telling the truth. It can't be any other way. I'm telling you the truth. I feel it." His voice was calm, but there was something inevitable, almost tragic in it. "Please, let's keep going. I can't," I whispered, trying to stay calm, even though everything inside me was screaming. My emotions were like tow strings ready to break at any moment. I knew he was confused about how he felt, and he needed help. Words rushed through my head at an incredible speed, but none of them felt right. I didn't want to hurt him, but I couldn't let this situation go any further. "Either, you see." I barely managed to get it out, feeling the lump in my throat grow larger. "I love you. But as a son, I can't let us destroy what we have between us, our pure love. It's sacred. Please understand me." I saw his face change, the frustration, resentment, and perhaps understanding all at once. He lowered his head like a child who had been told that something was out of reach, that you couldn't just take what you wanted. He looked as young as when I had scolded him for his scattered toys. Pain shot through me. How could I have seen him like that? Stem, I couldn't say another word. I just led him out to the car. We got into it in complete silence. It was a long drive, much longer than usual. We drove for 15 or 20 minutes, but it was like everything inside me stopped. There was no point going to my friend's house anymore. We were in a state where our thoughts weren't even clear. All I could think about was how heartbroken he was. I turned the car around. It would take forever to get home, but I knew it was where we had to go, where things could get back to normal, or at least try to. When we got home, he jumped out of the car faster than I could turn off the engine and disappeared out the door of his room. I felt the anger and frustration wash over me with renewed intensity. How could this have happened to me? To us? I had always tried to be the best mother I could be, giving him all my love, supporting him in everything. I raised him to be a strong, brave man, not letting him become a mama's boy. I put all my soul and warmth into him, sometimes forgetting that I am not a soulless machine but an ordinary woman who also needs support and care. And when it all fell apart, I was insanely hurt. All day long, I tried to approach him, to distract him with housework, to offer help, or just to talk. But every time he shut up and left me not wanting to even look in my direction as night fell. I lay in bed feeling a tremendous sense of guilt fill me. How could I have ruined his world, his feelings? I just wanted his happiness. But I think I only hurt him instead. Lying in the dark, I could hear my heart pounding. Suddenly, there was a quiet knock on the door. My breath hit. It was him. I prayed to myself that he wouldn't knock again, wouldn't come, wouldn't ruin this fragile silence. I wanted to tell him that I was asleep, that I shouldn't come in, but that would only hurt him more. This moment was so unbearable, so heavy. I didn't want this to go on. I beckoned him in. He stood on the threshold as if hesitating, and then slowly came closer. I pulled the blanket over me, covering myself, as if it could protect me from what was coming. Stem stood across from me, just silent, staring into my eyes. This went on for what seemed like an eternity before he sat down next to me on the edge of the bed. "Mom, I'm sorry." His voice was quiet, filled with bitterness and remorse. "I was wrong to tell you that tonight, but really I couldn't hold it in anymore. That pain, that feeling, they were tearing me up from the inside out." I stared at him, shaking my head slowly, not daring to say a word, afraid of doing something wrong, afraid of making things even worse. Everything was jumbled up in my head. How long had he had these feelings for me? How did we end up in this position? But at the same time, I could feel his pain, his anguish that not only confused himself, but was tearing me apart from the inside out. I clenched my fists under the blanket, trying to find words that might help, but at that moment, I couldn't say anything. When I hugged him, my heart clenched in a grip of fear and guilt. I held him so tightly to me, as if I was afraid he would be gone forever, that I would lose him in that moment. I realized that the fear of losing him was far greater than I had imagined. I held his hand tightly, as if that could keep us both safe from what had already happened and from what was to come. We sat like that for a few minutes, silent, in silence, as if the whole world had frozen around us. Then he rose, slowly, as if pressed by an unbearable weight, and went to his room without a word. I did not try to stop him. It seemed to me that if I let go of his hand for even a moment, I would not be able to hold him. And he left anyway. The next morning, when I came downstairs, I found him sitting on the couch, leaning his elbows on his knees. His face was sad, so familiar and so foreign at the same time. He was looking at me, but there was no longer the warmth in that gaze that I had grown accustomed to in all the years of his growing up. "I'm leaving." His voice was so quiet, but every phrase was like a blow to my soul. "I packed all my things. I'm gonna live nearby," he said, as a statement of fact, without a hint of reproach or accusation. My heart shattered into 1,000 pieces at that moment. I felt devastated, a pain that wouldn't let go. It was as if something inside of me had shattered, and only a huge hole was left in its place. I opened my mouth to say something to stop him, but the words stuck in my throat. I didn't know what to say to him. Everything that had built up inside of me, misunderstanding, bitterness, regret, came rushing out all at once, and I was left speechless in front of him. He left, and I didn't even try to hold him back. It wasn't until the door closed behind him that I realized that moment was a turning point. That day had changed everything.